My first exposure to mesothelioma was when I was 6 months pregnant with my first child. I was 21 years old, and my dad came back to the plumbing business that we all ran as a family business, and he said, "I've got to go get a chest x-ray." I just went to the 4th floor of Mr. Foster's home, and I couldn't breathe when I got to the top. So he went up to his general practitioner and said, "I need a chest x-ray right now." And he knew something was wrong. And then the general practitioner sent him immediately the next day to a pulmonary specialist in Portland, Oregon. My dad was always really proud of the fact that he had the best insurance money could buy because he was a union plumber. He belonged to Local 290 Plumbers and Steam Fitters, and so he just saw that this was solvable. He could get the best medical care, and so he was really proud of that. And we went to see the pulmonary specialist, and he came out and he said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Grimberg, but you have Steve McQueen's disease." And I thought, what is that? And then later we found out it was mesothelioma. So, and he lived for 18 months. That it was extremely rare. I felt like mesothelioma was extremely rare, and at the time it was. Now that I know what I know, I think it was underdiagnosed, misdiagnosed. I think all kinds of things around that. Certainly the state of Oregon didn't track it like it could or should. There's a lot around that. But my expectation was that my dad was a tough Swede. He was going to fight this thing. He was only 52 years old. And there was no way he was going to die on me. He had his first grandchild coming into the world. That couldn't happen. That wasn't how it was supposed to go. My dad's treatment was basically experimental at the time in some ways, but now that I look at how they're treating people, some of the same drugs are used, which tells me that we could even do more than we're doing. But my dad was on a combination of cisplatin and several other chemotherapy drugs. And how it was explained to me was initially they did a surgery on him. They called it an exploratory surgery after they put an incision, a big syringe in his back, and they pulled out all this fluid, and it had asbestos fibers in it. And so they knew for sure that that's what we were dealing with. And then they did some x-rays, and it showed a cloudy part. So they knew there were tumors on his pleura, which you have to have your pleura because it's the sac that holds all your organs together. You can't just take out a piece of your pleura. It doesn't work that way. It didn't then anyway, and I don't think it's really changed a lot now. And so their theory was, the surgeon's theory was, that if they cut all these tumors, sort of like cutting your hair, but they would cut all these tumors that had grown, because he'd gotten a little barrel-chested too. There was a little bit of a change in how he looked. He wasn't truly in pain though, at that time, which that soon changed. And so they cut all these tumors down, and then the theory was, with the different kinds of chemotherapy, giving them all at once, that it would kill these tumors, which would grow fast in the different stages of growth. So they basically made the tumors vulnerable and then tried to kill them that way. And he had some success with that, as crazy as that sounds. He lived 18 months, which back then was a long time. They said he could be gone in 3 weeks, actually, when he was diagnosed. Shocking, I don't even know if, I don't know, is there a bigger word than shock? Because I'm an only child and I was my dad's girl. So the idea of him being gone at that time, I mean, that's when you need your dad. You're having your first kid, you're 21. I mean, I was young, and we had a family business, and it was it was beyond shock. It completely probably changed who I became. My dad's exposure happened, we know that it happened when he was an apprentice plumber, and he used to make the paste that went on the boiler pipes. My dad also later in life was one of the tradespeople that helped build the Trojan nuclear plant, which we know is a hot spot, but that was in the 70s. So his exposure that probably killed him, because it takes, you know, about 20 to 50 years for this to raise its ugly head, happened when he was certainly an apprentice and he was the, you know, low man on the totem pole, so they had him mix up the paste. And then he would have exposure on other projects, because I remember him coming home with white dust on him, and my mom or I would go out in the driveway and sort of brush him off, and so we also had exposure. I have been, my mom is 83 now, and she hasn't had it come up for her, but I've been concerned. You know, when you get that cough or you get a cold or you have anything go wrong, you think, oh, I wonder if this is it. I wonder if this is it. I wonder if this is it. And I think when you have a parent that suffers with this, and that particularly when that's the parent you identify really closely with. I mean, I was my dad's girl. I'm like him in a lot of ways. And so there's just this connection that sort of scares you until you fully understand how big this is. This is a huge thing, asbestos. It's huge. You know, I don't know that I could really tell you. I could just tell you that the attitude of a tradesperson, having been around a lot of them, is that we just put our head down, we just do what we got to do to get the work done. My dad was a real type A personality, worked really hard, could probably work circles around a lot of people. And I think part of it is because it's a latent disease, because it takes so long to get sick. You just don't think about it. I mean, I don't believe he knew that one fiber could make a tumor. I don't believe he knew that. I don't believe he ever would have wanted to put his family at risk for getting sick. I don't think he would have wanted to put himself at risk. I think there's a difference between safety training, which there really wasn't a lot of that when, you know, many years ago when he was starting out in the trades. I think there's a difference between safety and awareness. Awareness is looking further down the road. Sometimes safety is immediate. And I think those two need to come together. Well, I think different unions in different countries are responding differently. My hope is that this year there's some work being done out there, but what happens, unfortunately, is it's more of a reactive than proactive approach. A lot of attorneys, a lot of firms farm to get cases sometimes, and they'll go into union halls and they'll get chest x-rays from folks, and they may get cases that way. And I understand that. I mean, business development is something I guess you need to do, but I think it would be good for unions to step up and get involved with hospitals for medical screening, and then workers could then choose their own attorneys rather than being chosen by attorneys. I think, and that may be happening some places. I'm going to look into that in the next year in my volunteer work with ADAO. I want to really help with that, to honor my dad and to stop this crazy making. I can't believe that we're still having this conversation. When I got involved with ADAO, I was, you know, it's been years, but it's like it was yesterday. I'm meeting other daughters. I'm meeting other sons. That shouldn't be happening. I think that legislative people, given my background in trying to do something for my mom with this in the state of Oregon, and I was all alone doing it, and then retired union people supported me, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but I think they literally respond to the loudest and the most aggressive, if you will, group of people. And you know, we've seen it in Oregon a lot with some of this, what I would call extreme environmentalism. I always tell everybody, fishermen and loggers have been taking care of our environment for a long time. You know, what is this? And I was talking with a mesothelioma survivor last night, which isn't something I knew existed until last year when I came to the ADAO conference. And I said, you know, if a fish got mesothelioma and didn't get what it should get, some large environmental extreme group would probably get a huge settlement, and the legislature would respond. I find it really frustrating that we don't respond to the human condition. Mesothelioma victims, or warriors as we like to call them, they're some of the feistiest people you ever want to meet. They fade out, they go away. And I think those of us that are children, we used to fade out and go away too, because I didn't know about anybody for over 20 years that had what my dad had. Nobody knew what I was talking about. They thought he died of lung cancer because he was a smoker, or he, you know, they didn't They didn't have any idea what I was talking about. I think there's probably several things. I think one of the things is that it's money. I think it's a culture of asbestos business. Certainly Canada exports, and I joke and I say, gee, until I knew that Canada was, the Jeffrey mine, and they were exporting to India, and they're hurting people in third world countries, and how insane is that? How could anybody with any conscience do that? That I think what happens is they just sort of move it over here so we don't have to look at it over here. If we move it to somebody else's backyard, we don't have to look over here, and we can still make money. When in fact, you can't tell me there isn't, with technology today, there isn't something that could replace asbestos. But it's a pretty bad habit for a country to have, to export death. I would like to see the union, as I've talked to other people, I ran my dad's plumbing business after his death for a while with my mother. My mother did, and then I did, and then I've since sold it a number of years ago. But I still have occasion where I talk to people that are union labor folks. And when you start having the conversation, let's say, oh yeah, my dad died of that. My dad died of that. And I'll say, have you ever thought about that it probably came home on his clothes? And you're in trades too. Even though there's real safety precautions now, I mean, there's things you've got to do. And I'm not saying it's, hell out for recess with asbestos. I mean, people are supposed to do the right thing, not that they always do, and I worry about in this economy that not happening. And I think people legislatively are more reactive than proactive. I think probably unions probably are too. I think they have safety training, but again, I think awareness training is different. I'd like to see the Asbestos Disease Awareness Organization welcomed into union labor organizations to share what we have, to share our network, to educate their members about what is a latent disease. You get a young guy that's an apprentice plumber and he's 18 years old. He's not going to think. Not unless it's a culture of thinking and absorbing information and understanding outcomes and how big this issue is. It's big. They think 107,000 people worldwide will die of asbestos-related diseases this year. Nothing about that makes sense. I'd like to see legislators be responsive. I'd like to see us, our agenda is prevention. My agenda is prevention. And I think compensation is important for victims. I think, there's some people, my mother gets a state accident check every month that's probably 20–25% of what my dad would have been making now had he lived. And not had a death, been a casualty from work-related illness. So having said that, the compensation in every state's different, and I didn't know that until I went to the legislature in 2005. And I spent 34 days down there, and the headline of the Oregonian, when I was all said and done, I just thought I would go in and they would want to rectify this problem, because when my dad died in 1982, there was this law called the statute of repose, which precluded my mother from having access to those federal, the set-aside bankruptcy funds. And she's entitled to that. So I thought, well, this is a way for me to resolve it. And this was before my involvement with ADAO. And ADAO, I think, was just forming then. I certainly didn't know Linda Reinstein. So I went down there, printed out the thing about how an idea becomes a law and how you change things. And I got in touch with Stephen Kazin of the Kazin Law Firm, and he helped me craft some legislation. He's a federal litigator, knows exactly what he's doing. And so I went in there as a daughter, and I signed up as a citizen lobbyist, and I did the rounds and went to the retirees at Local 290. And Local 290 was generous enough to send a busload down there, and we had buttons, and we were advocating for this, and because it was a little glitch in the law that they forgot about. And next thing I knew, I found myself in a room with big corporate lobbyists sitting across from me. And they were all scared that there were going to be all these lawsuits. And I said, I'm not suing anybody. I'm just trying to get this. I can't get access to that for her until this happens. My mother was cut off from my dad's pension. Didn't get it. My dad was a 28-year union member, but if he'd have lived another year, she would have had his pension. Within 2 months, she had no health insurance because he didn't live long enough. He would have liked to have done that, but it didn't work out.
Right.
So having said that, the legislature was, I felt, reactive and not proactive in this situation, because it wouldn't have cost my state any money. It's not like I was asking for a handout for her. I mean, this is things that she was entitled to. So my state senator called me I was on the freeway on I-5 on my way home, and this was in 2005, and she said, well, I'm sorry, Ann, it didn't work out, but maybe if you come back again next time, you'll have some friends in the building. And something just went off in my head, because I thought, wait a minute, this is bigger. This is way bigger than what is wrong in my little corner of the world. Politicians and decision makers that we elect are forgetting the human condition sometimes. And so how do we remind them about that? How do we engage? And I'm just one person. I couldn't do it. So then I went back to the legislature just this last legislative session before this last one, a couple of years ago, and thought I'd try it again. And I went to a state senator, not my state senator, but another one, and she said, well, Ann, this was a while ago. And I said, I know, and it's still unresolved, and my mom's still alive. And I said, this is all it's going to take to fix it. And I said, I made the assumption that all the Republicans wouldn't agree with me. So I went and saw Republican leadership in the Senate, and they totally understood. They said, oh yeah, my uncle so-and-so died of mesothelioma, and I totally get that. I understand what you're trying to do here, that's okay. So I thought, oh, okay, this will be not so bad. I understand how it works now, and they get what I'm saying. And so I went to her, she was a Democrat, and I said, I've got to get in front of Judiciary. And so I submitted it. She tried to be helpful, and I submitted it to Senator Prozansky, who was the chair of Judiciary at the time. And I went down there in person to do all this. You know, it's like a 3-hour drive from my house, because I wanted to be sure that it got to the right person, that everything, you know, things get mixed up. They've got a lot of things in front of them. And his administrative person called me, and she said, he has no interest in hearing the bill. And I said, what do you mean? I'm a citizen. I've got a viable issue here, and he has no interest in hearing the bill. I don't understand what that means. So I went to see a state representative friend of mine, because I'd made some friends by then, and I said, I need to meet with her again in person. Can you arrange that? So they arranged a meeting with her in person in this other representative's office, and I was as kind as I could be, and I said, why is this that I can't even get a hearing? And she said, he just has no interest in hearing the bill. So I went back to this other state senator, and I said, why is it that I can't get a hearing? And I said, all the Republicans are good with this. I don't understand. And you know, you hear that's what all the opposition is, when in fact I don't think that's always true. I don't think it's a party thing. So then I was told, well, this would be seen as anti-job. I'm thinking, well, my dad's dead, has been for a long time. My mom hasn't gotten the compensation she wanted. You know, dead people can't show up for their jobs, I guess. Maybe that's the point. I don't know. And I couldn't get a hearing. So I sort of gave up on that. And then I started putting more into ADAO, because it was so frustrating to me that I couldn't even get a hearing, and from a Democratic leadership point of view. So I guess it was a lesson I needed to learn, that this isn't a partisan issue. This is a human condition, and it needs everybody's attention, and it's preventable, and it's inhumane that it continues to go on. I mean, if somebody was shooting a gun at 107,000 people in the world this year, somebody would do something about it.